Hey everyone, this is Libertarian Black Man. Our President Donald Trump has launched a trade war with China. But what is the beef with China? Two issues in our relationship with them have risen to the forefront as justifications for this trade war. One of them is intellectual property or IP theft. I have theft in quotes for a reason. The other issue is the largest multi-decade trade deficit of any country in the world. Now, to understand the whole intellectual property issue, we have to understand what the IP is. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, intellectual property refers to the creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary or artistic works, designs, and symbols, names and images used in commerce. These things are protected under U.S. law with patents, copyrights, and trademarks. This issue also came to the forefront at the World Trade Organization between the U.S. and China, and our ambassador called it a technology transfer, which means that in fact it is not theft at all what's taking place. Our ambassador Dennis Shi said the forced technology transfer was an unwritten rule for companies who want to access the Chinese marketplace, because they have to partner up with a state-owned or state-directed firm. And of course, China is a communist country. So what that means is anytime you're doing business with a company, you're doing business with the government. And it says so right here that China's licensing and administrative rules force foreign firms to share technology if they want it to do business. So it is a condition of doing business in China to impose technology transfer requirements in order to access the Chinese market. The partnership that foreign firms must enter into is a 50-50 partnership. So what that means is when a business goes to China, they have to hand over half of their company to a Chinese firm, and this joint venture requirement goes back to the 1990s when China was trying to access foreign technology and expertise in order to help their economy grow, because the West was way ahead of China in terms of development of so many products like automobiles and cell phones and computers and many other things. So the Chinese wanted to access that technology, and seeing that there was high demand for access to the Chinese market, they said, we're just going to change the rules. We're going to say, hey, you can come here, but you do, as a condition of doing business here, have to partner up with one of our companies, which is government owned because China is communist, and then hand over your IP over to us. What that means is Chinese companies can then replicate, they can produce copies or near copies of that product on the global marketplace, because they now have the technology and the design and the IP of foreign firms. Is this intellectual property theft? Absolutely not. Businesses are willing to give up their IP over to China as a condition of accessing the Chinese market. If they really don't want to give their IP over, they can just say, look, we've got over 180 countries in the world that we could go to. We're not going to China because they want us to give over our IP and we want to hold on to that. But China is the world's largest market, and you can not only gain access to many more resources, but you have the lower labor costs, you have certain regulations that don't exist in China that do exist elsewhere, like in America, and you have a population that is educated in many ways better than in America. So you can find workers that you need in order to help you produce your products. So businesses are willingly entering into this arrangement and handing over their IP. It is not theft. It is simply the cost of doing business, much the same way that you, as an employee of a company you may work for yourself, agree to get to work at 7 or 8 in the morning and maybe not wear certain types of clothes, or have you must wear a hard hat or goggles, or there are certain conditions for every employee, and the business is not violating your rights. You are simply agreeing to a contract that you are making with the business, and that is what firms that are foreign are doing when they go to China. The issue of the trade deficit is perhaps even more of a point that President Trump has been harping on to justify his trade war. What is a trade deficit? Well, according to Investopedia, it is an economic measure of international trade in which a country's imports exceed its exports. So when you purchase more goods from a country than you sell to them, you have a trade deficit. In the case of China, we have a trade deficit of $335.4 billion because we sold $187.5 billion of goods and services to China, but we purchased $522.9 billion. So if you do the math, 187.5 minus 522.9 is 335.4. That is our trade deficit with China. Unfortunately for our country, our president misunderstands the trade situation, and his supporters of his trade war also are completely wrong on this issue. They're looking at trade with China as a negative thing. In fact, it is positive. Trade with China allows Americans to save more money on goods. The Chinese imports are often cheaper than what American companies can produce them for. So that means that people save money when they purchase imports from China. More savings means more money becomes available in the banking system for investment. What that means is more economic growth. You don't have economic growth without investment, and you don't have investment without capital, without savings. Chinese trade is not just good for us, it is also good for them. It is lifting Chinese people out of poverty because of American businesses and businesses from all over the world that have flocked to China, that are employing the Chinese for wages higher than what they were getting when they were still working in agriculture and did not have foreign businesses to work for. So we are lifting them out of poverty with higher wages, and that's why wages are rising in China. We have more economic growth for China, and because savings are piling up as a result of higher wages. China and East Asia are all benefiting because as China grows, countries in East Asia can also benefit from Chinese productivity. So we are helping lift people out of poverty by having free trade with China. Perhaps the greatest benefit of free trade is that it makes war less likely because countries are willing to exchange goods and services with each other through a contract, not through the barrel of a gun. In years past, historically, countries would just raid and plunder each other if they were running out of natural resources, and another nation which had an abundance of them refused to enter into a trade relationship with them. One perfect example is Japan during the 20th century. They invaded Korea in 1910. They invaded China in the 1930s, and all for the plunder of natural resources. China and Korea were not very friendly to China as far as their economic relationship, and so the Japanese, having very aggressive leadership and having an empire they wanted to expand, said, okay, we're just going to launch a war and storm in there and take everything. And many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people were killed during these invasions and occupations. You could even say that the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan in the 40s was the result of our the deterioration of our economic relationship with them. Because in the 4 years leading up to Pearl Harbor, the U.S. implemented ever more restrictive trade measures on Japan, including embargoes on oil, gasoline, scrap metal, and we froze Japanese assets. Other Western countries followed suit, and as a result, Japan lost access to nearly 90% of its imported oil and 3/4 of its overseas trade. So the justification given for us bringing the hammer down on Japan was that they had treated the Chinese brutally in the 1930s by invading to take over China. So we were outraged at that, and we clamped down on the trade with Japan. But what happened was this limited oil reserves for the Japanese, and they were estimated to only have 3 years left by the time of 1941. So Japan became more desperate and they looked to oil-rich Southeast Asia. The problem there was that it was occupied by Western powers. So Japan was in a situation where Western countries were trying to squeeze it dry of natural resources. And Japan, in desperation, said we're going to attack Pearl Harbor and try to weaken the United States. But warfare is always more likely when you have countries that don't trade with each other. So it is not a good thing for us to retreat into protectionism through a trade war, because it in fact can sow the seeds of the next international conflict. And the last thing we need today is a world war, because now we have nuclear weapons bigger than those that were dropped on Japan during the Second World War in the hands of many countries today. The last thing we need is a reason to put a country in a position where they're incentivized to want to go to war and use the resources of their country to plunder and take the resources of another country. If we want someone to blame for our trade deficit and IP theft situation, let's blame ourselves, not China, because in fact we are doing a lot to hurt ourselves. The Chinese economy, in terms of its productivity, has been increasing over the same period that America's has been decreasing for the last 40 to 50 years. America does not save very much of its income. China does. More savings means more investment, less savings, less investment, and therefore your economy can't grow without investment. China, according to the International Monetary Fund, had a savings rate of 46% in 2016. The global average is only about 25%. And America, well, we're in the single digits, less than 5%. No comparison to the Chinese. In fact, as of 2017, we've been saving about 3.8% of our income, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So, of course, China is going to be a much more productive country and therefore able to produce goods and services for less money than we will. They have more investment pouring in because they have more savings. We need to save more, and the way we save more is we make it easier for businesses and for individuals to be productive. Another reason that China is outproducing America is because their people are much better in math than ours. There's a high demand for expertise in mathematics and science and engineering. Our people are not getting the education in school that they should be getting while the Chinese are, so the Chinese are better able to serve as employees for international businesses, and as a result able to produce more goods because there are more of them working to produce those goods than America. Our trade deficit was aggravated by the fact that our money no longer keeps its value. We went the whole 20th century without a trade deficit until 1971. When we left the gold standard, we allowed our government to print money ad infinitum, and our money lost value. When the money loses value, prices go up, businesses cannot invest as much as before, and you have a less productive economy. We can't blame this trade deficit on China because we had trade deficit with the rest of the world 15 years before we had them with China. We didn't have one with China until 1985. So we should not blame China for the trade situation. Also, the trade war, as of December of this year, has hit a 10-year high. China is not buying American soybeans because they are retaliating against the Trump trade war. Americans continue to buy imports from China because they cost less. Generally, a trade deficit should not be an issue for us to be launching a trade war over. In fact, we should never launch a trade war, but the deficit is not something that is necessarily a bad thing. When somebody produces something more efficiently than you, your people will purchase more of it and you'll have a trade deficit. Your people are still benefiting. It is not a bad thing, unless it's aggravated by government policy. So what to do about this? If we want to get rid of our trade deficit and disincentivize people from moving to China, let's stop worrying about the deficit, stabilize our money, lower taxes and reduce regulations in order to incentivize businesses to stay in America and become more productive. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and the Twitter page, and we hope to see you in the next video.